When you first start playing Raid Shadow Legends, it's actually very easy to make key mistakes when actually upgrading your gear, and in general just knowing what gear is really worth putting into what kind of characters, right? Today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a broad guide about how to gear up pretty much any champion type, right? When I'm talking about champion type, I'm generally just speaking about whether or not they are an attack, a support, or an HP or defense champion, right? Those are really the general terms of how champions are categorized in the game. So yeah, let's get into it. My name is Midway and hopefully you enjoyed this video. Before we go any further, real quick, just check out Aptoide, please. It's gonna be allowing you to get bonuses whenever you're making purchases within Raid Shadow Legends, and once you do the purchase, you're gonna be getting bonuses right there that you can use eventually to buy stuff for free without actually using your real money, right? We'll talk more about that at the end of the video. For now, let's just keep going. So let's get some key concepts straight right off the bat, right? So certain champions, as we talked about, they're gonna be having the tag, whether or not that is attack, speed, defense, HP, and that is a little bit of an indication. Doesn't really tell you the whole story, but one very key element of what kind of stats you want into a champion is going to be what scales up their damage, right? Now, some of those might be very damn obvious, like for example, attack, right? You might think that attack is going to be increasing the damage on any single attack that my champions might do. Well, that is not actually the case. Attack stat will only really be increasing the damage of your attacks whenever it says down here, damage based on attack, right? For example, for an attack champion, that is what's going to be happening basically all across the board. Now, let's move on to something, for example, Bogoth right here. He is going to be doing the damage based off of HP because he's an HP based champion. He kind of wants to be a bit of a tank, and he's really encouraged to do so by scaling up the stat that he's told to increase, right? So there we go. Damage is based on HP. I think we got some of the guys, for example, over here, a support that is also going to be a little bit of a mix where he's going to be valuing that attack, right? Because, well, not everything is as straightforward as I already mentioned. But then again, we'll also have things like, for example, scale their damage based on defense, right? And the defense will also have other effects, but these, in this case, for example, it will also be scaling up the damage, right? So if we were going to be putting any attack stats onto this guy, those would actually do nothing, right? If we get attack, like flat attack or attack percentage, that is going to go to complete waste, right? So I might have some on the gear of this guy because, well, I don't know, it's not perfect gear by any means, but if you do so in these cases, that is going to be totally going to waste. If you want to join my team in Raid Shadow Legends, click the link in the description to get a free Narma as well as Anax, Uugo, and Mausoleum Mage as you progress through the game. Here's what you need to do. First of all, log out of Plarium Play on PC and uninstall. Then click the link in the description and register a brand new email. Launch Raid and complete the tutorial, and then go to your inbox and claim your first champ. Don't miss out on your chance to get a fresh start in Raid with a free Narma and 3 epic champs. Click on my link right now. Now, another key concept about gear and stats is accuracy, right? Accuracy, the way that works is that whenever you have any attack that's going to have a negative effect onto the enemy, whether that is applying a poison or actually triggering a debilitating effect, like let's just say turn meter decrease or steal buffs or stuff like that, you are going to be needing accuracy, right? That is when it actually comes into place. And there is a very easy way of actually telling how much accuracy you need on a certain character. For example, obviously this one is going to be applying a hell of a lot of debuffs, and he's also an attack champion. So we want to have enough accuracy so our debuffs actually land, right? If you don't actually have enough accuracy, the enemy is going to be resisting your attacks a lot easier. So for example, if we were to be trying to just gouge or just like assess how much of accuracy we need for the stage in the game we're at, we can easily just go, for example, to the I don't know, whatever, Dragon's Lair, right? The idea would be to just add a 0 behind whatever stage number you're currently at. Let's just say I am doing stage 15 or 16. I will need at least 160 accuracy for all my negative effects onto the enemies of this stage to actually land, right? That's just how it works. If you have below that much accuracy, you're going to be actually having a chance to miss, and therefore, well, that is of course before you gotta assess whether or not the ability has a certain embedded chance of actually applying the negative effect, right? So for example, let's just say my Akentum has, I don't know, a 60% chance of applying the poison. After that chance triggers, there is still the resist capacity of the boss, right? Based off of your accuracy and the resistance of the enemy. So there we go. Those are some key concepts really quickly explained. So let's start off by talking about the kind of champion that's, well, gonna be your bread and butter. It's gonna be your attack champions. Now, how you want to be building any kind of attack champion, it's going to be pretty straightforward. First and foremost, you need to see if there is any sort of negative effects that that champion is going to be applying, as we already mentioned, because in that case, you're going to be wanting to stack a little bit of accuracy, right? You will want your accuracy requirements, as we already explained, to be met. Otherwise, you are kind of just losing the efficiency of those skills if there is a chance that they are resisted, right? So first of all, you need to be covering your accuracy. Secondly, you need to be scaling up that crit percentage, right? You want to ideally have 100% crit rate on any attack champion. Critting is basically straight up just going to be taking that damage. I think it's going to be doubling it. And after the doubling, then you also, of course, want to be increasing the crit damage, because that's a way that we can take that a step forward and just allowing us to do a whole lot more damage. Now, after we are already 100% critting and then also scaling our crit damage as high as we can, we also want to be scaling up our attack percentage, right? Attack percentage is a lot better than just flat attack. It's going to be scaling it up by a lot more. And finally, and after all that is required, you want to be speeding up your champions. You want to be scaling up that speed, although you don't really want to be doing it too much, and there is a big reason for it. Now, ideally, you would always want your attack champions to go last in a fight, right? You would rather have your support champions and your buffers do their job first, right? That's why you want them to have higher speeds, because let's just say I have my OL over here who's going to be giving me a certain buff over here, giving me some turn meter to start off the fight and then some increased resistance. Or for example, I am running with Udex Arthur, who's going to be giving me the increased attack buff as well as the strengthen buff. Now, if I had more speed on my attack champions than on my support champions or my buffer champions, my attack champion would go first, and therefore it wouldn't actually have the buffs that I could potentially already have by the time their turn comes around. Therefore, you would rather always have that higher speed on champions, for example, like my Udex Arthur over here with pretty much almost 200 speed already, so that they can definitely go first. Now, of course, speed also allows you to get your turn meter filled quicker, so you don't really want your champions to have absolutely no speed. That is not to say that speed is one of the better stats in the game, but you would just want to have about enough so that your support champions are quick enough and able to go before your attack champions, and also so that your attack champions, well, they are able to function quick enough, otherwise it's going to be taking forever to take a turn. Something like 140 speed on your attack champions is usually just about fine. Anything higher than that, if they are like starting to go before any support champions, at that point you kind of want to be pulling some stats away from the speed and putting them elsewhere. Ideally, increasing that crit damage as soon as you have that crit rate at 100%, just scaling the crit damage as far as you can. Next up, we're going to be talking about the support champions, or more specifically, the kind of champions which do not care about accuracy whatsoever, because they don't apply any negative effects onto the enemy. So a very perfect example here is going to be Udex Arthur, whose kit is solely relying on straight up just applying a bunch of buffs to your team, having that turn meter feel, and then doing a little bit of healing and damage over here, and then he's just a reviver. So that's it. He doesn't do any negative effects onto the enemy besides a little bit of damage onto his A1. Now, these kind of champions, you do want them to be as quickly as humanly possible, because that way they're just going to be rotating through their skills and landing those sweet buffs and supportive effects onto your team the more often the better. But you also want to be making sure that they are not dying. You want to kind of be allowing them to get some stats which are going to be getting them sturdy, right? Getting them even in there in the fight and just not dying in general, right? So what we're going to be wanting to do with this kind of champions, in general, most support champions, specifically those who have no negative effects in their skills that apply to the enemies, is valuing the following stats. First and foremost, speed. We just want them to be as fast as possible. For example, over here, as you see, I have about 200 speed on this Udex Arthur, Arthur, pretty damn fine already, although we are going to be taking this maybe a little bit higher even, but that's just about fine. And next up, we just want to make them sturdy. HP percentage is going to be great on them. Resistance, because resistance, what happens with it is that it allows you to resist more stuff, right? It's kind of in the name, but it's kind of like the opposite effect of accuracy. Accuracy is going to be allowing you to have more chance of applying debuffs, while resistance is going to be giving you higher chance of resisting debuffs, so the debuffs are not applied to you, meaning that the enemy would have higher accuracy requirements to actually apply their stuff onto you. So therefore, HP percentage, pretty self-explanatory. The higher HP you have, the harder you are to kill. Resistance, so that debuffs don't go onto you, and then defense percentage, just so that you are a little bit sturdier and take less damage. Those are all the stats you want on this kind of champion. Again, speed, HP percentage, defense percentage, and resistance. Prioritizing for sure the speed, and then everything else is always welcome. HP percentage would probably be better than the others, and then it's just a matter of whether or not, yeah, your character is dying and that you're kind of good to go. You can always play around your artifact sets. For example, over here I am running with Relentless, just so that he has a chance of getting an extra turn, which basically is just like increasing his speed. And then I also have a 2 set over here with the speed, but for example on the Oella, I'm just running a triple speed so that her speed is like as high as possible. And as you can see, she's always going to be going first in my battles because, well, that speed is pretty nuts. And then I would have my Urex Arthur go second, and then I would usually have my Alice go third when all the buffs are already running, right? So the things that we already talked about are actually happening within my team, and that is exactly the setup we want to go for. Next up, we're going to be looking at a very similar type of champion, which is going to be the debuffers, right? The difference between the support champions, or straight up just the buffers or healers, versus the debuffers is that you really want to be valuing that accuracy, right? These kind of champions are going to be applying negative effects onto the enemy, and therefore accuracy is the priority on them, right? Their main goal and value in the game is to actually be applying these negative effects onto the enemy. Therefore, you want to be making sure that the accuracy requirements are met. Otherwise, their whole idea of being in your team kind of goes out of the way. Although you also really want to be getting a lot of speed on them because, well, those negative effects, you want to have them as often as possible happening, right? So let's just say this attack is going to be applying a lot of debuffs, right? So the more that we are able to go through this, but in this case it's simply one attack, like attack a single enemy, but let's just say I have something like Uugo, which I don't have, so I cannot show you. I mean, I guess I could like find him somewhere else. There we go. So let's just say, for example, we are looking at Uugo, who's going to be placing a bunch of debuffs onto the enemies, right? With his A2 right here, he's going to be able to go through a lot of turns if he has a lot of speed, and therefore just be able to apply all these negative debuffs onto the enemy. We got a little bit of leech over here, we got all these things that are going to be applying to all enemies, as well as in general just doing his role as a support that he is, but he's not just a buffer, he's also a debuffer, right? So first and foremost, in this kind of champions, you want to be making sure that you are meeting the accuracy requirements, which for PvE would just be depending on the stage you are fighting currently. But for example, for PvP, well, that's going to be increasing by a whole lot more because the enemy is also going to be having resistance, and therefore you want to be getting that accuracy as high as possible. And after that, it's just going to be sort of the same, right? It's going to be speed first and foremost after the accuracy is met, just so that you can get more turns going faster, and therefore getting back and back to those juicy abilities that are going to be having high turn cooldowns, and therefore just able to get more of those. Now, important in this kind of champions is also going to be whether or not you value their damage, right? Let's just say that you actually kind of feel like you want to be scaling up this attack, right? Like the damage, and therefore you want to be putting a little bit of extra value onto it, right? If you are trying to skill into, or rather stat into getting this character to not just be a debuffer and that's it, although, or rather you want to actually be having him a bit of a hybrid or just be able to pump a little bit more damage, in that case, then you would actually want to be scaling the damage requirements, just like we talked about before, right? The priority for damage scaling would always be the same. It would always be to get crit rate as high as possible to 100%, and then get the crit damage scaled up, then the attack percentage and all that good stuff, right? But these kind of champions also usually you just want them to be a little bit sturdy. So there's the balance between, do you just want to be actually getting that attack as high as possible or a little bit higher? at least, or you want them to make them sturdy, right? So if you wanted to make them a little bit sturdy and the attack was a little bit more of an afterthought, then you would rather go for what we did with the full supports or healers like Oela, which would be to, again, after the accuracy is met and the speed requirements are as high as humanly possible as well, just so that you, for example, have Uugo right here go at least like second in your team after like your buffs are out, so he does a little bit of damage with his attacks and then also applies those debuffs, and then after that the attack champions would actually go. So for example, you have that decreased defense debuff onto the enemies already. That would be the ideal scenario, right? You gotta think about speed sort of like straight up, it's just what it is, right? Like a who goes first kind of indicator for the start of a battle, and after that it's just passively regenerating as turns go by, and therefore at that point turns would kind of like be getting out of sync a little bit more. That is of course if you are playing manually. So you really just gotta think about, I need enough speed on my buffer first and foremost, then on my debuffer, and after that it's just all down to my attack champions, right? So yeah, again, if you want to making him a little bit sturdier, HP percentage, defense percentage, and resistance would be ideal on your debuffers as well. If you value the damage a little bit more, then well, that crit rate, that crit damage, and that attack percentage would otherwise be getting a lot more value. Although a mix of both can always be the kind of ideal, but you really kind of gotta put all your eggs in one basket in this game to be making things just a little bit better, I would say. If you go for full damage after just getting a lot of accuracy on this person, right, on Uugo, you could actually make a pretty strong Uugo and actually get quite some damage out of it, although you really gotta think about the scalings and how his damage works on this skill in particular. But otherwise, if you just want to have him live as long as possible and have him be applying as many debuffs as possible for as long as possible, then going for the beefier option would be quite good as well, right? There's no really definitive answer over here. I would just say that, yeah, really gouge whether or not he actually does enough damage to be worth just statting into the damage after the accuracy and speed requirements are met. Talking about beefing up your champions, there is the defensive kind of characters which are going to be wanting to take all the damage for themselves. I'm talking about, for example, characters like Molly Tankard who have usually provokes on their kit, right? For example, over here, just taking all the damage for themselves. Something like Ally Protection, which is going to be allowing that character to take away some of the damage that other characters are taking and put it onto themselves, right? You want to be really allowing these type of characters to survive, right? You want to be getting them to apply their provokes, of course, because that is also a negative effect which needs to be applied onto the enemy, and therefore that means accuracy, and you kind of also want them to be fast enough so that the provokes can happen often enough that they are actually doing their job, right? So for example, right here I have my Molly not booked up and with quite, it's actually at a decent speed, but I would definitely be wanting this skill to be down to 3-turn cooldown, right? I just want all those provokes to be actually happening as often as possible. Otherwise, I'm actually sitting on a character who's supposed to be tanking, but she's not actually able to do so, right? Because, well, she has very high defense, so a lot of bosses don't target her, and therefore she is also really not fulfilling her roles. So for this kind of character, you will want to be stacking up a lot of accuracy first and foremost, so that you are able to land those provokes. I just realized that I have so much accuracy onto my Moldy Tankard, but then after that you want to be getting a lot of speed as well. You don't want them to be going before your debuffers or your buffers, but you also don't want them to be going after your attack champions, right? You want to have enough speed so that they are able to once again fulfill their role of actually being a tank, and after that it's going to be a matter of actually just surviving. So therefore you want to be getting a lot of HP percentage, defense percentage, and also usually in many ways allowing them to just stack up a lot of self-healing, right? There's many ways to actually get a lot of self-healing going. For example, just like using sets like lifesteal, although for example you really wouldn't want to have a lifesteal set if your character is not doing a lot of damage, right? So things like regeneration sets, or I don't know, something like, I think it's Immortal over here, yeah, Immortal set, regeneration set, stuff like that, that's going to be giving you a lot of tankiness. And usually these two in particular, the regeneration and the Immortal, would be a pretty very straight up just almost perfect combination to get yourself to get a lot of extra healing going. Curing wouldn't really be, I don't think curing would be a good fit. For example, in this case it would actually require you to do some healing, but in any case, something for example that I could fit into my Bogoth would be those two other sets, and in that case he would actually also be a very kind of like similar similar character to the Molly. He's going to be taunting, provoking, getting the attacks onto himself, although in this case this guy has a little bit of inbuilt self-heal with one of his passives, but the same thing would stand, and that's kind of what I'm going for on him, right? I don't have enough accuracy on him. I need to be leveling that up quite a little bit, but after that I do have some speed, not the greatest but also not the worst. I think this speed is just about fine on this kind of character, and then it's just really just about scaling that HP and that defense. And the last kind of character or champion that we're going to be mentioning is going to be your healers slash revivers, right? Of course, if they do have a negative effect that they are applying, for example right here they do have, like in this case Mausoleum has a little bit of a decreased speed, you would still be wanting to value that accuracy first and foremost just so they can fulfill their role, but then you wouldn't normally want them to be as fast as, for example, somebody else like my Uugo Arthur, right? Because, well, in this case she's also going to be applying some buffs. That's why I want her to be fast, because I also want to cycle through her skills, but you wouldn't rather like fully have them be speedy zooming around, right? Their role really in this kind of champions, when you are looking at a healer slash reviver, is to be sitting back and waiting for the damage to happen, as they are also applying whatever negative effects they might do, like for example a decreased speed over here or doing a little bit of buffing over there. But you would rather want her to be waiting for the damage to happen first and foremost, and in that case, once that is the case, you're going to be able to actually heal that back up, right? The damage needs to first and foremost happen so that you can then go ahead and heal it. And also just sit back and wait for somebody to die. Like for example, my Molly, she's very sturdy, but she also has a revive. She's just a perfect example where she's just like standing around, and whenever the revive is necessary, well, that's when it actually happens. So same kind of thing goes for Uugo Arthur. It's never going to be a straight up just healer slash reviver. There might be a certain case of that, but more often than not, there's going to be some negative effects that you need to require and some other beneficial stuff where speed would come in handy. So in these kind of cases, it's really just a matter of balancing all that we already talked about in this video, getting that accuracy requirement satisfied, getting a certain level of speed where her kit will make sense. If there is any buffs that she's going to be applying, well, get that speed a little bit higher so it goes before the attackers. If that's not really the case, then the speed is not going to be as important. And then if you just want them to have be standing around for long enough, get enough HP, get enough defense, and then once that is the case, she's going to be actually standing around, right? Because she has the skill, the healing in this case, right? And any other effects, for example, also applying, right? Depending on the kind of healer that it is, it might have more self-heal than not, or rather just like general heal for the whole team, right? So that is the case for this one. She has a lot of healing in general. She usually is very sturdy just for the sake of being a healer. But if you just want them to also just be kind of like laying around, HP percentage, defense percentage, and of course, first and foremost, accuracy, speed. And that's kind of like the whole idea. Just balance around the stats so that your champions are able to fulfill their role. And very important, the concepts we already talked about before in the early part of the video, to know how you're going to be able to scale up your attacks, right? Whether or not they scale up based off of attack, defense, or HP, right? So you don't totally waste that. So that is kind of the video. Now, there's a lot of other concepts we didn't really get into, like for example, best artifact sets and stuff. That's really going to be depending on the very specific champion we are talking about. In some cases, you will want some artifact sets, in some others not. So like some artifacts will not really be as good, right? Like talking about artifact sets specifically. So yes, this is not really a guide for any specific champion, more like in general terms, if you're looking at a champion so that you realize what can I put on them that is going to be making sense and that they are going to be good, right? This also kind of gives you an idea of how you could be looking at itemizing specifically your character. Like for example, any attack champion is always going to be benefiting from extra attack and all that good stuff. Or let's just say, for example, the Savage set is going to be allowing you to do more damage because you ignore the defense of the enemy. Well, stuff like that is going to be a little bit more specific, but it's also going to be giving you the tips that we already talked about in this video, a little bit of a hint about how to put those items onto your characters. Now, before you go, as we mentioned before at the beginning of the video, there is Aptoide, where basically when you download Raid Shadow Legends through Aptoide, you're going to be able to earn bonuses that can go from extra 10% of the money you're spending all the way up to extra 35% of that much money, right? So let's just say I will be buying this pack, I will be getting a bonus that can go all the way up to 35%, right? Depending on how much bonus I currently have unlocked. And then once I do have enough of the bonuses, I would be able to use that bonus to do the purchase for me instead of actually using my real money. Now, there's going to be a guide down in the description if you want to use this for yourself. It only works on Android devices, like for example, emulators on your PC like BlueStacks, or basically your Android Android phone. And if you go ahead and use my code, which is going to be in the screen as well as down in the description, you're going to be able to earn a flat increase of 5% bonus from the get-go, so you can get it going as soon as possible and just increase that bonus by a little bit more so you can get even more of a bonus, right? So that's pretty much the whole video, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think about it, if the tips I talked about here were useful to you or not, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye, see you.